wit video. Those were the words of infamous, notorious killer Richard Ramirez. Now, I have covered the case of Richard Ramirez before, and I am going to pop that right here. But today we are going to talk a little bit about the Night Stalker docuseries on Netflix that I have been loving and consuming and enjoying. We are going to talk about episode 1, and because this is a limited series, I'm going to be posting a video for each episode. I believe there's 4 or 5. Let me know what you guys think of this. I originally was not going to sit down and film, but I really enjoyed this series, and I also really distinctly remember filming my Richard Ramirez case, and I remember feeling so strange that night when I was trying to record and film, and I just had like a weird experience while trying to film that video. So yeah, I don't know. We're just gonna talk about it some more. So I've been loving this series, and I love the cinematography of this docuseries a lot, and the music, and it's very cool. So episode 1 opens with a detective giving a PSA about a serial killer who is roaming LA, but then it quickly goes into these images of a happily bustling LA, with music, glamorous lifestyle. Crime has dropped significantly, but LA also did have a darker side in the 80s. Now, there were interviews inserted here at this point with citizens of Los Angeles being scared and frightened of an individual who is named the Night Stalker. And a woman says, "Somebody has to know him." You could be anybody you wanted in Los Angeles, and this is exactly why Los Angeles was such a dangerous, sexy place. Then this is where, throughout the series, we are given quotes and snippets of audio from Richard Ramirez himself, but they do not name him. They do not call him, at least at this point. We are then introduced to Gil Carrillo, who was one of the investigators in this case. We're given a bit of background about Gil. Now, Gil was a little punk, and he Los Angeles, and this is when we are introduced to Frank. He was dubbed the Italian Stallion. He was just a man that a lot of people looked up to, but especially Gil. He was very well known for the Hillside Strangler case in LA that he was working on, and yeah, Gil was just like, oh my god, this guy is the shit, I'm gonna be him. Then we meet this woman who is incredibly eccentric, and her name is Esther, and she used to work across the street from a Salvation Army, where she used to spend some of her breaks, her lunch breaks, and go shopping and thrifting at. And this is where one day she saw an AC/DC hat on a counter, and while she was looking at it, a hand came into her vision with a pentagram tattooed on his hand, and he picked up the hat and he smiled at her with what she calls this killer clown smile. He had horrible teeth. He was incredibly tall, looming, and dark, and he actually proceeded to, I don't want to say chase her, but like follow her for a little bit on the freeway, and this scared the shit out of her. And what I like about this little tidbit is you're like, that's Richard. As a viewer, you're like, oh my god, that's Richard, like she saw Richard Ramirez, oh my god. But at the time, you know, Esther had no idea, that this encounter, what would happen with this encounter. And later that day, on March 17th, 1985, the home of Dale Okazaki and Maria Hernandez was broken into, and the intruder had shot the two women. Now, the suspect went to shoot Maria, but a bullet bounced off of her keys, and Maria ran away while he ran inside to where Dale Okazaki was hiding behind a counter. The suspect waited for Dale's head to ascend over the countertop, and then he shot her. This is where a thrifted AC/DC hat was found on the scene. Now, when the suspect left the home, he was face to face with Maria, who he thought he had shot and killed. But Maria held her hands up and screamed, "You already shot me. Do you have to do it again?" And the suspect walked away. This was a close-to-home crime for Gil. This was like his area. He personally knew Maria Hernandez's mother. They grew up in the same area of his old East LA neighborhood. Now, when Maria described this man, she said he was 5'10", dark clothes, and Maria described that the reason why she turned around and saw him was because he purposely, like, he slammed his hand on the back of her car, like thudded it to get her attention. And this spoke out to Gil because he was dealing with a suspect that wanted the reaction, he wanted the confrontation, he wanted to see the fear, which again goes back to Dale lifting her head above the counter. He waited on the other side of that counter for her versus going around and doing what he was going to do. same caliber weapon, and this had Gil scratching his head, and he knew something was going on, something was up. On March 27th, there was a Whittier double murder of a husband and wife. There was a theft of $40,000, and the wife had insane marks on her uterus, like very angry stab wounds over and over in her uterus, and her eyes were cut out. This is where an 11-12 shoe print was found, and once again, Gil, who had these very strong feelings about what was going on, documented everything about these crimes. Then we meet a woman who is a surviving victim of the Night Stalker and describes an encounter when she was 6 years old. She was removed from her home. He placed her in his vehicle, and something about him felt familiar to her, like she could trust him, so she remembers feeling very relaxed, like this was normal. He showed her the gun in his glove box just to show her that he had control of the situation. He brought her into his home in a duffel bag, and she remembers the home being incredibly filthy, disgusting, and that a Madonna album was playing over and over and over again as he repeatedly sexually assaulted her. He then brought her to a gas station and told her to call 911 and to call her parents. She remembers he had a members only jacket. He was very tall, and something said to Gil that these abductions may be connected to his cases in Whittier and with Maria and De Okazaki. He felt that they were connected, but other detectives and people in the department laughed at him and talked so much crap about him and thought that he was so far out of left field. But again, Gil felt very strongly about this. They did find a suspect, and his name was, I believe, his name was Arturo Rubles, and Maria did identify his photo and said to Gil, it could be him. Now, what was so strange about Arturo was that he had a members only jacket. He had ladies' underwear everywhere in his house. He had pornography, like copious amounts, and tons of paraphernalia, and he very much looked like their suspect. And this is when Gil's boss said that he is a freak, but he is not your